This month's Where Did the Road Go is brought to you by three amazing people, Super Inframan, Allison Cook, and 36 Dingo. If you want to become a patron or a sponsor, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight is the 10th anniversary of Where Did the Road Go? I started doing this 10 freaking years ago. And there's only two guests I could possibly feel appropriate having on for the 10th anniversary, and that is Red Pill Junkie.
Good evening.
And this other guy, Joshua Crutchin, who it says here believes in fairies and plays tuba.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Hi, Josh. It's been a while.
It's been a while.
But yeah, you guys were part of the first handful of roundtables. I sent you guys the date the first time Red Pill came on. Josh, I heard you on whatchamacallit show, Micah Hanks' show. And when I first heard you, I was like, oh, I need this guy on the show. I can't wait for his book to come out.
That Micah Hanks show was my first podcast ever. Micah did me a real solid having me on, even though I didn't have, I think maybe I just completed the manuscript for A Trojan Feast. So he plugged me in, and we've been fast friends ever since. So the fact that you were impressed by my first interview, I'm going to take as a compliment.
It definitely was. I felt that we would click really well. And I was like, oh, I need to talk to this guy. And then you wrote me and you're like, hey, I have this book. And I'm like, oh, this guy. Yeah, you have to come on.
That's right. I did write you. And it was, I was like, I don't know if you. I think the book was done at that point, but I had found Where Did the Road Go somehow. I mean, there is this sort of Where Did the Road Go extended universe, as I like to call it, all the affiliate podcasts. Nowadays the cool kids call those swapcasts, right?
Yeah, right.
But you were doing it before it was called that. And I'd found Where Did the Road Go, and I knew that I wanted to speak with you because I had to get on the endless hamster wheel of self-promotion. So here we are. I never got off.
and the thing with like Swapcast is, I mean, to me, it's just like help everyone, who's doing quality stuff, get the word out because it helps everyone, Where the Road Goes not going to be for everyone. Some people are going to prefer, say, Strange Familiars or Conspiranormal or something like that, and that's great. If they like that more, I want them to be exposed to it.
And if your podcast is repeated across two different podcasts that you listen to, that's fine because there are so many good podcasts out there nowadays on this stuff. I mean, I just don't have enough time in the day to listen to them all, unfortunately.
So initially, I didn't try having more than one person on Skype for probably a year because my internet was so bad. And I was like, is it just going to freak out if I try to have more than one person? Like, I felt like I was lucky to be able to get one person clearly.
Well, and Skype was pretty janky back then. It's not janky now, but yeah. And so I think the first time I tried having more than one person was the UFO History Show with Mike and Aaron. So we did that, and that worked. And I went, I can have more than one person on. And so I think the very first roundtable, Josh, I asked you to do it, and we had Mike Hughes. And I think Summer, and Summer didn't come in until halfway through, which was not preferred, but that whole situation worked. And then we tried a couple other combinations, and then Josh, you were like, why haven't you invited Miguel? And I went, I don't really know Miguel. Should I invite Miguel? And you were like, yeah, you should invite Miguel. And I'm like, inviting Miguel. When the heck did I meet Miguel? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
I listened to that same Micah Hank interview. I was back then. I was listening religiously to Micah's show, and I listened to that. And I think that also Micah had a really good chat room.
Yes,
a lot of our friends interacted there. And you also contacted me. I think you sent me an email. I guess, I don't know, I'm guessing Micah gave you my address. So you sent me an email and asked to Skype. So we chatted for about 2 hours or so.
That's okay. Yeah, this is coming back to me. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And you also asked me, I think, to read the manuscript so I could give you my impressions. And yeah, that's how we hooked up.
And you haven't been able to get rid of me ever since.
Unfortunately.
I knew who you were, Red Pill, because of Micah, because he would reference you in the chat room and stuff. And I think you were on there once, but you barely talked. So I didn't get much of a sense of like you talking on there. But you also were very kind to write up stuff in the Daily Grail about Where Did the Road Go, which was very helpful and appreciative. I was very appreciative of that.
Yeah, and I still remember how for some reason I was still up 3 a.m. Maybe I was playing a video game or something, and I had my tablet or my cell phone, and I received this message from Soraya asking me if I wanted to be on Where Did the Road Go? And I was like, oh, finally! It took you long enough, because by then all my friends had been there. I admitted that I felt a little left out.
Well, that was not intentional. If I had known you wanted to come on, I would have asked you much earlier.
Yeah, but the idea of asking, oh, can I be there? It's like you need to let it happen organically.
Sure. And there are people that I've had on who would like to have back, have said, oh, I'd like to have you on a round table, and I don't, because I'm just so overwhelmed with most of this stuff, and I'll forget and be like, oh, I still wanted to have that person on, and then I throw roundtables together really quickly, and then I'm like, still didn't have that person back. And I feel bad, because I'm like, they probably feel like I don't want them on, but it's not the case. I'm just overwhelmed. When I started this, I was not so overwhelmed. I got to spend a lot of time on it, and now I just it's hard. It is. It's hard to get each show done every week and make it a quality show, because I don't want to like phone anything in. I still want to read the books all the way through, even though my reading ability declined after I had COVID the first time, which is very frustrating for me. I used to be able to down a book in a couple of days, and now I'm like, oh man, I can get a few chapters and I'm done.
So let us interview you, Soraya, for once, like now that we're talking about how things have changed as you have progressed in doing Where Did the Road Go? And definitely, one of the reasons the show has been able to maintain its quality and its popularity for so long is because, you invest a lot of time. You're not winging it.
No.
So you when you do your due diligence and your homework, when you have guests. So let me ask you first of all, so many guests you already had, do you still have like someone in mind that you haven't had a chance to interview and that you would be, really wanted to have in the future?
Probably. Greg Little was on that list. I got to have him on a few months ago. I would like to have Graham Hancock on still, although not like when I started it, he was like, okay, that would be the best person, like my top person on my list. Now it's kind of like, okay, I still like Graham and I still want to talk to him, but I feel like everything he's had to say, he's probably already said a million times other places.
Yeah, you're just going to get pre-selected sound bites that he, reflexively just sort of spits out.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Yeah. Like, I'd still love to have him on, but it's no longer a top of the list. The same with Whitley Strieber. I feel the same way. Like, Whitley's out there so much. I would love to talk to Whitley, but, No,
I think that having just talked to Whitley this past Tuesday, the thing about him and his opinions are constantly changing.
That's true.
And I think that y'all would have some really interesting things to discuss.
There was someone else. Oh, of course, Jacques Vallée would be nice to have on. Someone offered me to have, if I wanted to interview him a couple of months ago, and I responded with, well, yeah. And then I never heard back, and I was like, okay, well, I'll follow that up later.
Context to Jacques at all. It was just like, would you like to? They're like, yeah. And they're like, cool. I bet you would.
Well, they were offering me the new book. They said, would you like the new book, and would you like to have Jacques on the show? And I was like, well, yeah, absolutely. And then, I don't know, just nothing happened. I also didn't follow it up because I'm terrible at emailing people. So that just never quite came about. But I mean, yeah, there's every once in a while I'd love to have the two guys who wrote The Invisible Gorilla on. I haven't contacted them yet, so I don't know if they'd be willing to do it. But I think that book is so important to understanding how we see reality. And of course, that folds right into how we perceive the paranormal. Even if they don't want to talk about paranormal stuff, that's fine. I think their research was important.
Well, sorry, don't let me over talk or overshare. But I think that's something that just happens, though, when you're in these topics enough, is that like you kind of want to have conversations about something besides the paranormal so you can understand the paranormal.
Right. Oh, yeah.
There's this Ami Michel quote that Jeff Kripal told me about that I cannot get out of my head ever since I heard it. And Ami Michel, French ufologist, said something basically to the effect of UFOs are the only topic where you start out looking at strange things in the sky and you end up studying Arab mystics. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much on the nose.
I will say that I started this show at the right time because starting a podcast now is hard. I mean, there's so much stuff out there. And now that these major companies have realized there's money to be made in podcasting, they're just overwhelming everything. And whereas occasionally that stuff is good, most of the time it's just generic junk because that's all it has to be. So when I started...
Yeah, it's the paradox. The technology to have a podcast has become more easy to acquire.
Yes.
You know, you pretty much can have a $50 microphone, a decent laptop, and you're ready to go.
Yep.
And a good, like you said, internet connection. Internet connectivity has also become better. But yeah, at the same time, that paradox is that now that everybody can have a podcast, everybody's trying to have a podcast, and now to be able to stand out from the rest of the crowd is definitely going to be much more difficult.
Yeah. So, I mean, I didn't start this as a podcast. To me, I was thinking radio. You know, I was more thinking along the lines of Coast to Coast, but on a small scale, since I was already on the radio, and it was 2012. And so I was like, you know, I had asked at my radio station if they'd let me do an hour-long talk show on the paranormal and got no response. And I went, I'll take that as a no. All right. And then I was talking to a guy who did a local music show. And I said something about it. He's like, oh, that's a cool idea. I'm like, yeah, they didn't respond to me. He goes, did you write the program director? I'm like, yeah. He's like, yeah, he does that. Write him again. So I don't think I did write him again. He's like, oh, no, I thought this was a great idea. When do you want to start? And I'm like, I don't know, January. And he's like, cool. We have a Grateful Dead show starting in January. You want to work with that and start on the same date? And I'm like, sure. And initially he was going to have me on, then the Grateful Dead show, then The Last Exit. And I'm like, well, that seems silly. Why would you put something in between my two shows? Why don't we do Grateful Dead, Where'd the Road Go, Last Exit? And he's like, oh, that does make more sense. Okay. I was thinking like a Sunday night or something like that initially. I didn't know where they would want to put something like this. And I only put it up as a podcast and as a YouTube video because I figured, hey, more exposure, the better. And I was lucky enough, and I think because I was on radio and because the podcast world wasn't overwhelmed at that point, to get people like David Weatherly, Robert Schock, Andrew Collins, right off the bat. And so those guys came on, and I think the David Weatherly YouTube video jumped to like 4,000 hits almost overnight. And I was like, whoa, that was unexpected. Okay, cool. So, I focused a little more on putting the stuff on YouTube and figuring out how to monetize it, which was not something I had even thought about going into this. This has always been a labor of love. I like talking about this stuff. I like talking to people about this stuff.
I mean, that thing is one of the characteristics that most of the good podcasts have in common. The idea that it didn't start as a money-making scheme.
Yeah.
That people were doing it for the love of it. Greg Bishop. Doing Radio Misterioso, and he's almost religiously against any attempts to try to commercializing it. It will ruin the allure of it for him. But now, obviously, like you said previously, a lot of people that they think that if they put out, I don't know, 12 or 15 episodes, the Spotify is going to knock on their door with $1 million contract, or some kind of, or some sponsor, is going to call them.
Last year when we did this, I did it with the Snake Brothers, and they asked how many shows I had, and because I never did it as a podcast, I just date them. I don't number them. Like when people do podcasts, they usually number them, but I always put out the date it airs on the radio. So I had to go while we were doing the show and like go into one of my folders, how many files, and at that point I had over 1,000 shows. So Jeez. Probably over 1,100 at this point, and that's not counting Patreon stuff.
You could have learned a much more valuable skill in the time that you spent sitting on a podcast.
I've learned so much from this show, though. Like it has completely changed the way I view everything. And I've met And I've met awesome people and become friends with a bunch of them.
Well, that actually leads into a segue. It's a pretty good segue for a question that I would have for you, which is, in the past 10 years, what opinions of yours have changed?
Well,
like, are there things that you thought were legitimate that you've soured on? Are there things that you thought were bunk that you've come around to?
Yes. So let's see. When I started this, I didn't have a problem with hypnosis. The first person to bring to light the stuff about hypnosis, probably in the first year or so of the show, was Paul Kimball. So I was having different guests on every week, and people kept saying they wanted more shows, and I'm like, but I don't want to just put something out for the sake of putting something out. It has to be good if I'm going to put it out. Not that every show is going to be good, but it's not saying I'm just, like I said, I'm not going to phone it in. So I started having Micah Hanks and Paul Kimball on like every other week or so as a midweek edition of the show. Just went up on as a podcast. And one of those weeks, Paul and I got into the whole hypnosis thing, which, again, I didn't know hypnosis was that unreliable. I didn't realize it had no evidence of being a memory recall tool or any of that stuff. And after I talked to him, I went and checked all the stuff he said, and all the stuff he said was true. And I was like, wow, that just shifted a lot for me because, I took a lot from people like Bud Hopkins. That stuff was really interesting. And now it's like, oh, so it doesn't discount everything Bud did, but it changes the way you have to look at it to realize that the hypnosis thing isn't necessarily a perfect recall tool like some of these people make it out to be.
100%. And that's I've sort of landed on a more charitable interpretation, which is one that I'm sure longtime listeners will be familiar with at this point. But the idea that hypnosis is accessing some other place in real time, I think, is a much more valuable way to approach it than an active recall of memories. I mean, there's a great example that was in this book by Jim Schnabel, I think his name is, called Near White or Near Dark or something like that. Dark White, something like that. And he has an example from a hypnotic regressions session that Ginny Randles was attending. And it became very apparent over the course of the hypnosis session that the questions they were asking were being relayed to the entities in real time through the abductee. And I think people who were present, maybe even the author, if memory serves, was using this to discredit the whole thing. And if you're approaching it from the angle of memory retrieval, that's definitely true. But if you sort of view it from that other angle, that this might be some form of legitimate contact, which is something that's certainly hinted at with things like psychomantiums and other scrying and divination methods, then it has still retained some degree of utility, I guess the best way to put it.
Other things so going into this, I would have said that poltergeists are simply manifestations of unconscious PK energy. And I was pretty satisfied with that. And I believe it was this guy, Red Pill Junkie or something, who mentioned that why couldn't a spirit hijack that energy? And initially I was like, no, that doesn't. And I was like, oh, he's right. Why couldn't it? And actually, you also mentioned the hypnosis thing that, what if people are tapping into something else when they're hypnotized? It's not a memory recall, but they're actually having that abduction experience right then while they're being hypnotized. So you'll throw things out that are so outside my way of thinking sometimes, and then I just initially have like this mild resistance to it, and then the more I think about it, the more I'm like, no, he's right.
I mean, that's interesting for the fact that I have such a lousy memory when it comes to like personal experiences. And it's almost like when we're having these roundtables, it's almost as if I am entering in some sort of hypnosis of my own. Like I enter in some sort of like flow state in which obviously I'm having a rapport with you guys about the current discussion, and then all of a sudden I might have one of those crazy ideas, throwing them at you. Sometimes those ideas are really interesting and something that I completely unexpected, that wasn't really thinking about that at the time. And then Uriah says, "Oh, you remember that thing that you said in that and so occasion that was so interesting?" It's like, no, actually, I don't. But I agree with myself. That is very interesting.
I have a friend whose memory is absolutely horrendous, but he is super creative. And so, like, we'll be working on something, and he'll come up with an idea, and I'll be like, "Oh, that's great," and I'll write it down. And then, like, a year later, we'll go to do, whatever it is he came up with, and he'll be like, "Oh, that's really good. How'd you come up with that?" I'm like, "It was your idea." He's like, "Really? Oh, I guess I'm really good at this stuff."
Well, that opens the question of where do ideas come from?
Yeah. I was just going to say something else that had to do with Josh, and now I forgot what it was. Every time I read one of Josh's books, it puts me on new paths as well. Like, I don't have specifics for you, Josh, but like, you're one of the people, like for Ecology of Souls, which I have not finished yet, you're like, "Well, I have the summaries right there." And I'm like, no. First of all, I feel wrong just reading the summaries, but also I know I am going to read this and I'm going to learn stuff that I didn't know that I'm not going to get from the summaries. You're going to talk about something, I'm going to be like, "Whoa, what the hell is that? I need to look more into that," Or you're going to present an idea that I just had never heard of, because you're approaching this stuff like the smell and the taste thing. No one's ever done that before. No one even thought to do that before. And you're showing these interconnections. So one of the things that definitely changed was that I don't think I had really much of an opinion on Bigfoot. When I went into this, like, it wasn't one of my main focuses. I was perfectly fine with it being an undiscovered ape. And slowly, the more I talked to people, the more stories I heard, I went, well, there seems to be this like paranormal element. But I mean, you and Tim with the freaking where the footsteps end, you've removed any doubt that this is primarily a paranormal experience, whatever that word paranormal means, but not a flesh and blood ape.
Well, I still leave some wiggle room. The thing that the thing that perturbs me the most is why for lack of a better term, supernatural phenomena would adhere so closely to very specific aspects of primate anatomy.
Yeah.
And I'm referring to things like, dermal ridges and mid-tarsal breaks in the footprints. These footprints, from all appearances, look to be made by things that correspond to primate anatomy. You even have sightings where Bigfoot's hair stands on end, which is a factor seen in great apes. A lot of these indigenous depictions, especially on totem poles, show the Bigfoots with their lips pursed in a hooting expression, which is something, again, that you see in great apes. So why this phenomenon would choose something that specific, but not just make it a chimpanzee or something, is something that still confounds me. Because when this phenomena, if we want to speak singularly about it, decides to appropriate the imagery of other animals, it oftentimes seems to just reproduce the animal and just give it some interesting traits. So that's the one thing that keeps confounding me. But yes, I think that the high strangeness is actively perhaps underreported in these stories. I really do at this point.
And I mean, when I read Illuminations from, I can never remember his first name, Willette's his last name.
Eric Willette.
Okay. And so, and he's looking at UFOs as mass poltergeist events, which is not entirely different from some stuff that Seth said. And I was just kind of like, this is really interesting. And that's when I was, and someone's talking about a Bigfoot case, and I'm going, that's also like poltergeist activity. And I threw that out to like you and Tim, and you named it the wilderness poltergeist. And it was like, that's perfect. That is exactly what it is.
Yeah, I think that to be fair, I think that Lauren Coleman mentioned that
he did
back when he was the steward of the Crypto Mundo blog. But like so many other things that I have tried to do with my writing is taking a passing observation that someone makes and say, wait, no, let's unpack this and see how far we can run with this. I mean, that's basically what the Brimstone Deceit was people kept on mentioning this smell of sulfur, and I'm like, okay, but what does that mean? Aren't you curious? Don't you want to dig into that? So yeah,
right.
Lauren, someone, I think Red Pill, I think you were the one that brought up that Lauren had come up with that idea and just mentioned it in passing and then never really focused in on it. Just kind of like, oh, there's similarities here, and then moved on. But I had never read that. I came up with it independent of Lauren's observation. Mine was inspired by the Illuminations book. Like I said, it was him treating something like the UFO phenomena as a mass poltergeist event was like, wow, that's a really interesting idea. And usually those are the authors I'm most interested in talking to. Like, I don't necessarily think he's necessarily right about it all, but there's something to that, There's definitely some connection in there. And then I started looking around. The more things I looked at, the more things I'm like, yeah, this poltergeist idea kind of flows through all the paranormal stuff.
Well, it's his interpretation has entered my list of possibilities behind the UFO phenomenon, because what I normally say is a certain proportion is misidentification, etc. But then that unexplained portion of sightings, I don't know, 10, 20, 30%, whatever, is comprised of a lot of different things, including perhaps extraterrestrial vehicles. But now I throw in that, mass psi phenomena manifestation in there as well, because I thought that his work was so insightful.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree, because like some of the stuff that is being currently discussed in ufological circles regarding alleged recovered material samples from UFO crashes, or maybe debris that was expelled from UFOs, the Ubatuba case. Nowadays, I tend to think more of those materials to be more akin to apports, like the apports that were reported in spiritual seances, than that's something that was being deliberately or accidentally left by a solid craft.
Yeah, so this is a very Patrick Harper idea. He folds into that as well. Saints' relics and some of these fairy artifacts that we have, like tiny boots and flags and such.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's like I said, those are the people I'm most interested in talking to, not necessarily the big names, but the people who have these novel ideas or different ways of looking at things. That's more interesting to me. And it's not that, the bigger names aren't also interesting, but again, a lot of times they've already said their piece so many times on so many different forums.
Yeah.
Let's see, what else have I changed my mind on? I don't even know if it's so much changed my mind, but open up more acceptance to things like I going back pre-reading Seth, I did not believe in any channeling. I thought it was all nonsense. The Seth material changed my mind on that, although I was never sure, and still aren't, what Seth is. It's definitely relevant information, kind of like Castaneda. Even though it may have not been literally true, the relevant information in there, the stuff works. It's valuable.
Yes.
And now, and especially talking to people like Jack Hunter and stuff, I'm a little less dismissive of things like channeling. Talking with people like Ren and others who are into astrology, I'm a little less dismissive of astrology, which was another thing I tended to just throw out. And I guess the big one, so I think it was the first year, I think it was 2013, I was able to get David Paulides on my birthday. And it was one of the few 2-hour shows I did when we were still in a 1-hour format, and we did it live on the radio. And I mean, David's stuff was blowing me away. I was like, wow, this is a whole new mystery here. And it's really fascinating. I mean, it sucks that it involves people disappearing and dying, but this is, the whatever's causing it is interesting. And now we, here we are 10 years later or so, or 9 years later, and I still think some of the cases he has pulled up are very interesting. However, I think most of them need to be thrown out. I think most of them have prosaic explanations. I said that early on, and people kind of glossed over it. But I said I think a lot of these have prosaic explanations. We just don't have enough information, because lots of things look weird if you don't have enough information. Like the one in Russia there.
Dyatlov Pass?
Yeah, Dyatlov.
No.
I mean, it looks weird. It might intentionally be made to look weird. But if we had every bit of information, it may not be that weird. It might be perfectly understandable.
Well, you criticized Politis, so YouTube comments in 3, 2, 1.
And that's the problem. No one should be beyond criticism. Like, I'm not attacking David personally. It's just I don't feel the data holds up. And when we did the show with the Snake Brothers, where we someone had gone and re-researched a bunch of the cases in his book and found more information that showed like most of these people were alive. There was nothing weird, and I'm like, okay, that fits what I said. Most of these cases, it's prosaic explanations. But initially I was like, why did David not have this info? And they pointed out that a lot of this was coming from newspapers from way back that have only recently been digitized. So when David was doing his research, that stuff wasn't easily available. Now it is.
Well, and the other thing that I think bears repeating that was brought to my attention as an issue in research by Tobias Wayland was that if you go back to the original sources, even for some of the strange stuff, you'll find that subsequent retellings have added details. And I'm not sure that it's malicious in any way. I think that it might just be a written game of telephone.
Yes.
But you do find that even the example that he used was some completely superfluous details that were added to a retelling that if you went back to the original Fate magazine, I mean, obviously it's in Fate magazine, like it's talking about something strange.
Yeah.
But if you went back to the original Fate magazine article, it didn't mention any of those details at all. So I think that's a problem as well, is that something like Dyatlov Pass ends up getting, pardon the pun, it snowballs.
Yes.
Into something a little bit stranger than it maybe should be.
Well, I read this the other day. I don't remember. It popped up in my newsfeed somewhere that Humpty Dumpty was never an egg.
Really?
And everything, like most people, when you picture Humpty Dumpty, you picture this egg sitting on a wall. And nowhere in the original text does it say he was an egg.
Well, he does fall down and break. What was he, a porcelain?
I think
was he a Hummel figurine?
I think they said Humpty Dumpty was generally like a term for people who were extremely inebriated.
Oh, I've been a Humpty Dumpty in the past.
But I mean, that's an example there where, it just kind of assumes itself into the information, or sometimes we put stuff in there because it makes more sense.
Right.
Now, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was just going to segue into another. Well, I was going to heap some praise on you. One of the things in the past, I haven't been with Where Did the Road Go for 10 years, but one of the things in the past 8 years, now that we're in 2023, that you have brought me around to that I was very resistant to in the beginning was the possibility that at least some of these phenomena are self-generated. I was very resistant to that because we all want there to be some sort of objective third-party entity in the equation, but sure. I've come around to that in a big way probably in the last year or two. And I think back to those early conversations that we had, and I'll be like, no, Soraya, I want there to be a thing. And you definitely made me do a 180 on that.
Well, and it doesn't mean that all of them are self-generated, but some of them certainly are. And that speaks to how much power we have over our own reality. If we're generating this phenomena, even unconsciously, we have the ability to do that. We just don't know how to use it.
And perception and all those things that we talk about. But yeah, I think that once your worldview gets weird enough, you start to view everything that isn't us or isn't in the flesh as being sort of a soup that sits on the other side of whatever this veil is, and that could easily be a part of us or the realm that is, our psyches.
Yeah. I did want to add to the missing people thing. There was a case we covered of the kid in North Carolina who was lost in the woods and taken care of by a bear.
Casey something?
Yes, Casey something. And that is a weird case.
Yeah.
And David did uncover quite a few cases like that are very strange. It's just, when you say a lot of them are prosaic explanations, people get very upset. They're like, no. They want there to be a thing.
There was a historical marker that was placed somewhere I can't remember right off the hand, so I apologies to everyone, but I dropped it in the Where Did the Road Go Slack a while back, and it was a story that was commemorating a sort of local legend that was basically a one-to-one match for that North Carolina story, and it almost makes me wonder if, I mean, this might be a little bit far out for some people, but it makes me wonder if sometimes we have these legends that are sort of boilerplates, and onto that gets grafted real life. Like, in other words, life imitates art, to be really reductive about it. I mean, a good example of that I found recently, this stopped me dead in my tracks. There was one of the most profound paranormal experiences that I've ever had was at Waverly Hills in Louisville. And there was an entity on the 4th floor known as the creeper or the crawler or something like that. And what it would do is it would approach you from the ground, or it would sort of like, go up on the walls and above you, like, it would sort of rotate as it ran towards you, all along all the surfaces. And this sounds like a really unique entity. And I was at the Trans-Allegheny, I believe it's called the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia this past September. And the tour guide said, yeah, here on the 4th floor, we have an entity known as the creeper, and it tends to walk along the walls and the ceiling. And I'm like, okay, I have to, if I assume that you're telling the truth, and I had a girlfriend at the time who saw this thing at Waverly, and she described it that way before she was aware that that entity was on that floor. What does that say about hauntings? Is there a boilerplate for hauntings that the phenomena adapts to? I think that's a worthwhile approach to consider.
And I still like my idea of sort of that wandering consciousness that then sort of grafts itself onto our expectations, or takes its form from, sort of a consciousness exchange sort of thing. So if you're in the woods and you see something weird, well, I've heard about Bigfoot, so now you see Bigfoot and you describe the Bigfoot, and then someone else sees that same piece of weirdness, and our brains go, remember that Bigfoot thing? Maybe this is the Bigfoot thing. And eventually that piece of consciousness starts forming more and more to project itself as that Bigfoot thing, because that's what it's being seen as.
Either our expectations or the phenomenon itself flipping through the Rolodex of our brains and deciding what to wear that day. And
right.
Well, that's the thing, because the paranormal, in order to be perceived by the human mind, has to go through a sets of perceptions and limitations imposed by the human brain. Like, this is something that I was thinking about when I was reading a chapter in Rick Strassman's book DMT, the spirit molecule, about how many of the volunteers who were, administered very high dosages of DMT. One of the most common things described are very bright colors, like neon lights, something like that. And then some of the other very common reports involved entities that look like clowns. And I was thinking, well, I mean, what are colors? Colors are basically, energy vibrations that are perceived by our brain. And if there's a change in the frequency of that energy, our brain will perceive it as a change in hue or tonality. So getting back to the clowns, what if those energy vibrations are perceived by the brain as some kind of like discrete packets of energy vibration that seems to display some kind of like intelligence? Wouldn't that be seen like, if you see something that you feel is an animated entity that kind of like your brain perceives it as almost like a humanoid looking, but you see it displayed in all sorts of weird colors? Well, what is if you think of a human with weird colors, you might think, oh, well, that's a clown.
Right.
Oh,
A clown is as a human that is put some kind of really weird, bright, garish makeup in order to to be perceived as a clown. So that's the kind of things that obviously that is discussed in the psychedelic circles in parapsychology. unfortunately is not perceived, is not discussed in paranormal circles, because like we were discussing earlier, or maybe we weren't discussing it in this conversation, the paranormal is always looking for a very literal explanation of these reports. And it's probably that's a great mistake, because you are leaving behind the human factor.
Yeah. And that would actually be another thing that my brain has shifted on, is the use of things like psychedelics, because before, I think as I started this show, I would have been against it. And now, it's up to I think personal choice. It works better for some people than other people. Like, I have no desire to use it, but I no longer feel like it's cheating or invalidates the experience.
Right. God, if you took ayahuasca, Soraya, the world would end. But to that extent, I think that there is an interesting counter argument to the amount that we project onto these phenomena. I think that the psychedelics provide a fairly good counter argument in the fact that people tend to see very specific things under the influence of some of these substances. There are some specific things about DMT, while not universal, definitely seem to happen more often in that space. Yeah. And if it was up to interpretation or own personal biases, that shouldn't be the case. Similarly, there are those stories, and I have reason to sometimes doubt the veracity, but you do hear these stories about, famously, a group of Inuit were administered ayahuasca and reported seeing large cats, and jaguars are something that people see under the influence of ayahuasca. So that does imply that there's something fixed, at least in some cases, about some of these modes of perception.
Yeah, or it's opening to a very specific world, so like you're Inuit.
Sure, yeah, that's the way to put it.
Yeah. That dimension that it's allowing you to see is that has been populated by the people of the Amazon.
And this is something that I discussed with a friend of mine recently via Twitter, how I was talking to him about Josh's book, Ecology of Souls, and now this idea of UFOs are psychopomps. And this is something that also aligns with the paintings of ayahuasca artist Pablo Amaringo, who used to depict all these bright flying saucers inserted into his psychedelically induced artwork. And he used to say, well, those are like the vessels that the ancestors or the spirits utilize in order to enter into our world. And I was talking to my friend about this idea that, well, what if the dead have some sort of technology? What if they also went through a certain industrial revolution? And he said, well, I have a hard time believing that spirit will need some kind of like a machine in order to come into our world. And at that time, I didn't have an adequate answer for that. But then I realized, I remember all these stories and reports from Rick Strassman's book, because one of the very common things that the volunteer reported is seeing machines, these very advanced machinery that they didn't understand what they were supposed to do, these seeming technological objects. But the idea of going through a psychedelic experience, and instead of seeing like nature things or seeing just mandalas of color or whatnot, the fact that many of these volunteers reported machinery. Okay, so why are these psychedelic entities using machines? Well, maybe for the same reason that UFO entities also use machines. What if UFOs are alien entities having a trip? And that's why when they have a trip, that's when they come into our world, and that's why UFO encounters are so chaotic, they are so unexpected, and also they are so brief.
Well, and also the entities, how many times have you read the stories where the entities look surprised, surprised as the witnesses? That definitely conforms to that. Yeah, that was one of the weirdest ideas that I ended up playing with in Ecology of Souls. And man, it's kind of intimidating to try to present that to an audience and them not think you're crazy, that there's some sort of like technology from the afterlife or something. But you look into it, and there are old issues of Flying Saucer Review back from the 50s, the earliest days of ufology, and they're talking about this idea that there might be technological advancement on the other side of the veil. And sure enough, if you look back at some of these older cosmologies from China or Egypt, they say, yep, you die, and then you wake up, and you eat, and you drink, and you go to the bathroom, and you worship, and you work in the fields. And, if that's the case, if it's as mundane as all that, why not technological advancement on the other side? I'm uncomfortable with that idea.
Yeah.
I'm really uncomfortable with that idea, intellectually and quite frankly, spiritually. Like, there aren't a lot of ideas that I'm uncomfortable with spiritually.
I don't want to die and then continue to do this.
Right, exactly. Monday mornings still happen after you die.
Yeah.
I want a different experience. A good one, but a different one. Oh, it's
different that it will totally overwhelm you by how different it is, or maybe you want to be different in degrees, gradually different. Because I think that's what Josh is getting at, that the traditions that posit that after you die, you end up in a world that is kind of similar to this one. And then as you progress, you go into other spheres of existence that are become less and less comparable to what your human experience was like.
I also think, and this is something more recent that I started feeling, that death is not necessarily the same experience for everyone. Like, what happens to you when you die may not be a 100% this is what happens type of thing. It may be very different for everyone. Maybe some people stick around as ghosts. Maybe some people reincarnate. Maybe some people move to another dimension. Maybe some people just rest for a while. Maybe some people get incorporated back into the whole, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, like, there's nothing in this world that is so absolute, Like, this whole world seems based on as much variation as possible. Why would that change with death?
Well, I'm going to take the chance to address this reductive statement that I heard that just every time I get the chance to counter argue it, I have to take up the banner. And I heard on a podcast someone say, well, if reincarnation is real, then why do people come back as ghosts? I'm like, okay, that's such a simple one-to-one way to look at it.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a part of us that lingers. Maybe just the ego lingers in your true self, the thing that is stripped of identity. Maybe that's what goes on to be reincarnated. I mean, there's so many different options.
Right.
But again, people try to. I have found over the years that people think of these things in very narrow ways, and it's saddening. To that end, I was gonna ask you what you've become frustrated with over the past 10 years in these communities, but
that's a good question.
We don't want everybody complaining about sour grapes, so that's up to you, Sarat.
Tell us how much you hate UFO Twitter.
I avoided UFO Twitter, so it really didn't bother me that much. I've never been a Twitter person. I mean, I'm on there and I've been on there since early on, but I've never actively used it very much or followed much on there. I mean, it's a cycle. I mean, we see this repeated cycle in a lot of these fields, and new people coming into it don't know because they haven't lived through the cycle yet. So they're very excited about the possibility of finding the answers finally, not realizing that carrot has been on that stick for a long time.
I'll never forget, this was before I signed off of Twitter for good, which is a decision that I will never regret, but I'll never forget being on UFO Twitter and somebody being like, guys, did you know that a UFO once shut down a nuclear missile base? And I'm like, yeah. And I know that sounds like maybe I'm being snarky or something, but if you want to, I mean, and this was a highly prominent Twitter profile on UFO Twitter, let's put it that way. And it's like, if you're going to take the stage and speak with some degree of authority on this, avail yourself of the history of this phenomenon.
Yeah.
It boggles my mind. And sometimes I feel like it's just a lack of curiosity in some ways.
So before I started this, did you want to say something, Red Pill?
Well, just wanted to add that not only a lack of curiosity, but also I don't know. I don't know if I want to say lack of integrity, but I guess a lack of honesty with regards to positions. There are people that shift their positions, with every single tweet they send, and how 5 years ago they were saying this thing, and 2 years ago they were saying a different thing that had to be modified because their expectations weren't met. Like 5 years ago, they said, "Yeah, like disclosure is going to be this year." Like I have it on good authority through my contacts that like next week the Congress is going to like tell us that UFOs are real, and obviously that didn't happen. And then it's almost like, I don't know, when prophecy fails 2.0 with these people. And I don't know if it is actually, an honest reaction of someone who wants to keep their faith. I don't know how else to categorize that. Their faith, and that they are going to see this wonderful thing they hear so much, UFO disclosure. So they have to keep themselves motivated by saying, well, okay, so that didn't happen, but I'm sure that next year or next month it will. Or if it's by now, it is some kind of grift, because obviously some of those people have managed to capture an audience. They have a YouTube channel or a podcast or something.
Yeah.
So now they have to, keep feeding the fires of disclosure, in order to not lose their audience. I don't know.
And there's a lot of people out there who just have sort of a fun interest in this type of stuff. They're not looking for depth. They're just looking for the surface level. Oh, I want to believe in aliens, or I want to believe in Bigfoot, or I want to believe in ghosts. And they're not going to do the research. They're not going to. And with the internet the way it is, with social media, all these people have a voice. So they can push but I want it to be this.
Well, that's. I don't think those are the people.
They're not the grifters.
Those genuine good actors are not the ones that Miguel and I are speaking of.
Right.
I'm talking about people who want to speak with some degree of authority or are so sure of their opinions.
Yes.
That they'll at the time when I was on UFO Twitter before I got my death threats, they would push back so strongly on a statement that I can back up or just an opinion, and they'd be like, yeah. Well, no, psychic phenomena don't leave returns on radar. And I'm like, okay, yeah, Jung talked about this in his essay on flying saucers. Have you read that? No, I don't need to. It's like, okay, well, then go away. at least understand like where I'm coming from on this. Yeah.
So when I started this show, like the year before I started the show, when I thought of potentially doing it, it initially came about because as I was listening to more and more radio shows, initially looking for stuff with Graham Hancock, and then being like, oh, wait, other people are going to be on these shows too, and expanding out and trying to find other interesting shows. One of the ones I found was Red Ice Radio, which now is a completely different thing than it was then. But what I liked about it is that the host... Sometimes you'd forget the host was there. Like when he was interviewing someone, when he had someone like Graham on or Robert Schock or something, he would let them talk. And when he asked questions, you could tell he knew the stuff. Like he would ask very informed questions. And that was, a contrast to George Norrie on Coast to Coast, who I don't hate. I found so many great guests from Coast to Coast, including Micah. And including Jim Elvidge, who was the very first guest on the show. I had just recently heard him on Coast to Coast and when he would make a perfect first guest. And I wrote him, and he wrote me back and said, I usually don't do shows on Saturday night, but I went to Cornell and I used to listen to WVBR. He's like, I'd love to come on for your debut show. And so that was kind of cool. But, like Coast to Coast didn't go in depth. Red Ice went in depth. Now, the exception there is George Knapp. George Knapp always does good in-depth interviews, and most of the ones I've heard of him do. So I kind of modeled myself after that in Red Ice Radio a little, but then I'd hear some of these other shows, and there was one where the host just wasn't even, she was talking to Jesse Ventura and not even paying attention to what he was saying. And I was like, why does this person get to talk to Jesse Ventura? I want to talk to Jesse Ventura, and I never did. And I probably wouldn't have him on at this point because we just don't do politics and stuff. But at the time I was like, I'd love to talk to Jesse Ventura. That would be a really interesting conversation. So I started thinking about doing it. But one of my problems was, it's like, do I really know this stuff as well as I think I know this stuff? Because I know I could talk to, other people around me who have, interests in it, but are not experts by any means. And so I was really nervous, like, am I going to do this and just come off like an idiot because I don't actually know this stuff? And I reached out to Walter Cruttenden because I had been pretty blown away by the Lost Star Myth and Time book that he put out. And I told him, I said, would you come on my music show? I'm like, because I'm thinking about doing a talk show on this stuff. Would you come on and let me interview you? And he said, let's talk. And I think that was one of the most nervous phone conversations I ever had, because that was kind of going to be, it. Like if he said no, I probably wouldn't have done this show. Mm-hmm. So I got him on the phone. We talked for like an hour. It was a great conversation. And then he said, I would love to come on. So we did the interview. We got done. I was nervous through the whole thing. And I said, how was that? He's like, that was great. He's like, you should definitely do this as a show. And I went, really? Okay. All right, good. And for a long time, every time I had a guest on, I said, do you have any comments? Like, did you like the interview? Did I, was this a good conversation? And got generally all positive comments from guests who were also very happy I read their books, which was not something I expected when they started telling me that most people don't read the books. So, yeah.
Ryan, that's something you've been from the start, is a top-notch Class A interviewer. And I think that is a vanishingly rare talent, and you should be commended for that. And 10 years shows that it paid off in the long run.
Yeah. I feel like this is something I was supposed to do. Like, I always knew there was something related to this stuff that I was supposed to do, but I never really knew what it was. I mean, because this goes back to the 90s. And there weren't podcasts really in the 90s, nothing like that existed. So, it wasn't. And when I started doing it, I'm like, this was the thing. This was the thing I was supposed to figure out that I needed to do. And, like I said, I try to help other people in this field anywhere I can. That's why I like having, new authors on, like Joshua Crutch in there. And I literally misspelled Cutchin like the first 10 times you were on.
Was it Crutchin?
It was Crutchin every single time. Yeah. And I would know it was Cutchin, and my fingers would just add an R. And you'd be like, you spelled my name wrong again. I'm like, did I really? Son of a...
Well, I think to that extent, I also should thank you, Soraya, because a lot of where I am today is because of you. So thank you so much for giving me a voice early on. And I just wish I could be on here more often.
Well, there's one person who could change that.
Yeah, we could do these earlier. That would be you.
we could record these earlier. That is something that could happen. There was something else I wanted to say to that effect, though. I don't know. I'm very, like I said in the beginning, I'm very much a fan of having like everyone help everyone else. I like to create communities. I like to get people in touch with other people. Like when I talked to Mike Cleland and then I talked to Aaron Gullius, and I went, these two guys are like two different halves of the UFO field. And
those are definitely my favorite Where Did the Road Go episodes, when you have Aaron and Mike go through the history of UFO or the year in review. You're right. Those two make a great chemistry. I don't know if it's because they are from the Midwest. So that's that makes it. But I have re-listened to some of those episodes more than once.
And it's I like the fact that they're also completely okay with that they don't agree with each other.
Right.
And that's always been an important thing there. Go ahead, Josh.
It is the peanut butter and chocolate of ufology. But I think to underscore that, I think it deserves to be said time and again, every time the topic of these two gentlemen comes up, that there is you did combine those into one mega download, right?
Yeah. A couple of years ago, so it doesn't have the more recent stuff. And I could only do, I think it had to be two halves.
But I guess the point is that if you are someone who wants to speak with some background about these topics, like that's a good way to do it. Just mainstream those podcasts for like however long it is, 20 hours or whatever.
Yeah.
But just listen to them, and you will come away with a very good grasp on the history of ufology.
All right, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. So this is our quick mid-show break. I honestly can't believe this show made it to 10 years. I'm thrilled. And actually, The Last Exit for the Lost, my music show, for anyone who is not aware of that, and if you're into heavy, dark music, check that out at thelastexit.org. That's it. I think 29 years this coming year, this June. So that's just crazy to me. There's so many people to thank for this show existing, but of course, beyond everyone else, all of you listening are what keep this show going. Whether you're a patron or not, obviously patrons are a big part of keeping this show going, but even those of you who just review it, who just listen, share it, and interact, it makes the show what it is. And so thank you all for supporting me for however long you've been supporting me. As a recommendation this week, another podcast somebody actually suggested after I posted last week's show or the show 2 weeks ago on YouTube. They recommended a show called Station 151, and it's a horror sci-fi comedy. I don't know if it's actually listed as a comedy, but it's genuinely funny in spots. And it's really good. It's about a guy who goes down to Antarctica, and he's working for this sort of billionaire type of guy, sort of Elon Musk-ish type of group. And he doesn't actually know what he's supposed to do because everything's top secret. And I haven't gotten too far into it. I'm on what episode am I? Oh, I guess I have. I'm on episode 7. And I'm very much enjoying it. So I would recommend it. It's new. So it's only been going for a few months. Not even a few months. The first episode posted December 6th of 2022. It looks like he did a couple there. But yeah, most recent one I've listened to was called Trust, episode 6, and I am definitely enjoying it. So I'm going to recommend that one. Plus, it's a new podcast. It can probably use some love. Contact info. If you want to send me stories for a future listener stories episode, stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com is the best way to do that. Anything else, contact@wheredidtheroadgo.com is a good one. If you're looking to be booked on the show, booking@wheredidtheroadgo.com. Links to all our social media, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, YouTube, Discord, all of that can be found at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Everything related to the show should be available at wheredidtheroadgo.com all the way back to the first show 10 years ago. Next week is our UFO history show with Mike Cleland and Aaron Gullius. We'll be talking about stuff that happened in 2022, and I'm sure it's going to be a blast. Also, if you want to snail mail me something, actually send me something, you can do so at Where Did the Road Go, P.O. Box 444, Ovid, New York, 14521. And with that, let's go back to the show. And we are back with Red Pill Junkie and Joshua Cutchin on the 10th anniversary of Where Did the Road Go? And we were just talking about the UFO history shows. The UFO 2022 UFO history show will be next week, unless something horrible happens. But I've already talked to both Mike and Aaron about taking care of that next week. So we'll talk about what's happened in the last year in UFOs then. I'm trying to think, like, a lot of people have told me they got into this show because they heard that. And despite my earlier comments about David Paulides' work, a large number of people found this show because of David Paulides. There's no way, he was a huge internet thing for a while. People, just devoured everything that was out there with him on it. I don't think it's quite as popular as he was, but having him on early on definitely was a way that more people found this show. And to clarify, again, I don't really have any problems with David. I just think that, like, his patterns and stuff don't hold up because so many of the cases need to be, like, reinvestigated and have the ones that are solved just kind of tossed out and then see what's left. Because
following on that, do you have any in the past 10 years any UFO story that you used to believe but now you think the case is bogus or is not as solid?
Yeah,
as you once thought.
The big one there in the UK,
Rendlesham.
Yeah, I would have said going in that Rendlesham was one of the best UFO cases, and now it's like, I don't know. There's so much disinformation. You had the guy that worked with Peter Robbins that turned out to have lied. Larry Warren, yeah. And Peter, to Peter's credit, when Peter figured out that Larry was lying, he came right out and said, okay, this book is I don't know what's true and what's not in this book anymore. So I'm just leaving the whole Rendlesham thing behind. I was fooled. I was not, he didn't double down and try to be like, oh, no. So
yeah, I think that bears repeating that what he did was the correct and honorable thing to do, and also I think it bears repeating that it seems like something strange happened that evening.
Yeah, it does, but how much of it was maybe created by the military to see how the people would react?
Well, here's the thing, though. I mean, that Rendlesham has always had a strange reputation, and everything from phantom black dogs to there was this famous account, I believe it's the Gervais of Tilbury account, where they got a wild man in their nets as they were fishing it off the coast there. And again, Rendlesham is, I was astounded to learn this, Rendlesham is 4 miles from Sutton Hoo, which is, one of the largest Anglo-Saxon artifact sites. And the dig itself at Sutton Hoo was spurned on by sightings of ghosts, ghost Anglo-Saxons there. So the whole area, I mean, that's Suffolk in general is really kind of strange.
Yeah, and I know Peter Robbins said he had saw weird lights and stuff when they were there. Yeah. Andrew Collins in his Alien Energy book talked about, I think it was right up there by Rendlesham, them having a whole bunch of weird stuff happen to them. So yeah, the area itself has a history of weirdness, so it's not impossible that Rendlesham had something real going on. But it's just been so muddied now.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike Roswell, it's not so far in the past that we can't find some info, but the military has clearly decided to make that info as muddy as possible.
Yeah, exactly. So like maybe in 30 years from now, we might find some new piece of information about Rendlesham once it's declassified.
Yeah, maybe.
And I'm fine with a 30-year moratorium on discussion of Roswell. That's fine by me.
Oh, aren't you excited that you will might be alive for the centennial anniversary of Roswell, Josh? 2047, man.
And there again is one of those things that people don't realize, that Roswell disappeared completely from public UFO discussions for the most part until like 1980 with the MJ-12 documents.
Mm-hmm.
People think Roswell's been a thing this whole time, and it has not, Like it wasn't until the late 70s, early 80s that Roswell started popping up like maybe this really was a crashed flying saucer. And I remember watching a Fort Fest with John Keel, and he was on like a panel, and somebody asked him, "Oh, what do you think about the new book that's coming out on Roswell?" And Keel goes, "You mean the one where they hypnotized the like 2-year-old to get information that, of what was happening?" He's like, "I think that's utter and complete nonsense, and nobody should buy it."
Yep.
Keel is somebody I would have loved to have talked to, even if he was grumpy. But
and that's a good question. What personalities that have passed away would you like to talk to?
Obviously him.
Break out the Ouija board.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. I wish I could still have Jeff Ritzman on.
Yeah. Oh, man.
You're here.
It was someone else who passed away. Guiley. What's her first name?
Mary.
Yeah, she was...
Rosemary.
Yeah, Rosemary.
Rosemary.
So I met her at Fort Fest there when I met you, Josh, the first time. And I talked to her about coming on the show, and she was all for it. And then I never really got a hold of her, and then she passed away.
She possessed a depth and breadth of knowledge and interests and, I guess, authorial acumen would be one way to put it. Prolific writer. And from my interactions with her, a lovely human being. And I've heard the same from others as well.
Yeah, she was completely a very sweet human being when I talked to her, and that made me want to have her on more. But I'm, like I said, I'm always so overwhelmed with everything that I just never got around to getting a hold of her. I actually found her card recently that she gave me with all her info on it, and I was like, oh yeah, that never happened.
Speaking of cards, the UFO tarot card featuring her. That is Temperance is probably the one that I'm most proud of.
Nice.
Like the way that it came out, it amazed me even myself. Like, this looks kind of cool. And it's also Susan Demeter's favorite card.
Nice. Yeah, I haven't had her on yet. I've talked to her about coming on, and again, never followed up. I mean, there's definitely, in the ranks of people who helped make this show possible, obviously, Walter Cruttenden was there, and gave me feedback and agreed to come on my music show and talk about this stuff. which I'm sure was a little out of step for what he was used to. What was funny is that, I told him it was a metal show, and he was like, yeah, I'm not really into metal. And I sent him a copy of it with all the songs that I played in between, because we'd talk for like 20 minutes. I'd play a song related to like the Yuga cycle or something like that, because there's lots of metal bands that sing about this stuff. And he writes me back and goes, yeah, he's like, this came out really good. And it turns out I liked the music you played, and I'm kind of surprised. But a lot of it was like symphonic stuff from like Therion and stuff. So that's not shocking. I had that same experience with Richard Dolan, where he told me he didn't like metal. And I'm like, hang on. And I pulled up some Nightwish and played it. And he went, all right, what's this? I like this. But John Shooter was a huge help with the website early on, because initially I had it on Blogger. And so it was on Blogger and half on the Where Did the Road Go site. All the news shows, because I needed some kind of feed, came off of Blogger. And so when he started talking to me, he offered to do the website. He's like, can I make you a website for the show so you don't have to use Blogger, and I'll show you how to keep it updated and everything else. So he's been a lifesaver on numerous occasions over the years. The man is a genius with code. Obviously, if I wasn't on VBR, things might have gone differently, because I don't know if I would have gotten those guests early on. Micah Hanks I haven't talked to Micah in years, but Micah was instrumental in helping me out early on, as was Paul Kimball to a degree, but more Micah. I mean, Micah had me on his show to help promote this. Micah would, a couple times I ended up with a guest canceling on me last minute, and I'd contact Micah, and he'd be like, yeah, of course I'll come on. So, because I didn't know all you people then.
We three are like 6 degrees of Micah Hanks instead of Micah.
True.
So,
I mean, yeah.
No, I was going to ask you, this just came to me. What would you do differently?
I don't know.
After, with 10 years of hindsight.
I mean, I like where it is, so I'm afraid if I did anything differently, it wouldn't be in the same place. I think that's always my question. Like, I'll look back at events in my life and be like, would I change that? And I'm like, but I'm overall, I'm pretty content with my life. If I changed that, maybe I wouldn't be.
That's a very healthy outlook.
Like, it may seem like, I really wanted that to happen, but it didn't. But where would I be if that happened?
Yeah, decisions we made, even terrible ones, that influenced our path. Probably, if my decisions have been different, I definitely wouldn't have connected with all of you guys, and that's something that would have made my life definitely all the more poorer.
Yes.
So so you have to take the good with the bad.
Yep.
Because this it's about the road. Where did the road go, and where did the road will take you?
And I do occasionally still get the question where the name comes from, because I don't exactly talk about it all the time. It was the name of a blog that I had on the paranormal, but it came from us. We used to do promotion and like interviews and stuff with wrestlers and stuff for a small wrestling company around here. And they'd bring in some bigger name wrestlers. So we got to talk to like Jake the Snake Roberts and people like that. And boy, is that a weird interview. But this night we were in Watertown, got to interview Kevin Steen, who I'm very happy to see is now one of the top guys in the WWE, because he deserves it. And so we did all that, and it was at a fair. And by the time we got done, all the lights were off. The fair was closed. And we didn't even know where the car was, because wherever we parked, they had like a tractor that would like take you to the fair, because it was a distance away. So we had to vaguely wander around until we found the car. And I'd never been in Watertown, and my girlfriend at the time wanted to get something to eat, because we hadn't eaten the whole time we were there. And we pull up to the intersection, and there's no indication of where anything is, but down ahead of us, we can see all these lights that look like maybe Main Street. So we decided, okay, let's go straight. So we go straight, and what it is kind of an industrial driveway. And so we go over the top. My friend Lance is sitting next to me. My girlfriend's in the back with her friend, and as we go over like maybe a few feet onto this road, suddenly we're on gravel and then grass. And I'm luckily not going fast, and I go, where did the road go? And Lance goes, where did the road go? Because now because it kind of dipped up and then dipped down, and when it dipped down, it made a 90-degree turn. And it wasn't a curve. It was literally like a 90-degree like driveway type of situation. And like one of them leans forward and goes, "Did you say where did the road go?" And I was like, we just stopped in time before we went down this slope into a building. And looking at it later, I was like, oh, it's an industrial park type of thing. Okay. I mean, we went down the road and found something. But I'm telling a friend of mine, my friend Maria, this story, and she goes, that should be the name of the memoirs for The Last Exit for the Lost. Where did the road go? And I'm like, oh, that's perfect, except I'm never going to do that. And then I thought, but I do have this paranormal blog, which was just called AP Paranormal, because I do everything under the sort of general tag Etheric Productions, and have since probably 91. And so it was just AP Paranormal, and I'd post blogs and stuff of, my thoughts on different things. And so I changed it to Where Did the Road Go? And that was in 2012. And that was also around the time I was thinking of starting the show. And so when the program director said, well, do you have a name? And I went, oh, well, Where Did the Road Go? That's totally what it's going to be. And he's like, that's awesome. And I'm like, okay, good. So very simple way the name came about. But again, a lucky sort of circumstances that gave it the name, because I have no idea what I would have called it.
I love that story.
And if I had...
Every now and then I'll be driving by an unfinished stretch of road, or I'll see like a driveway that's just stops, and I'll think of where did the road go. Like I have it in the back of my head that I'm going to take a picture every time I drive by one of them, and I never do. But send it to
that's liminality, yeah.
But again, that's one of those things, like things had to line up just right. Like not only did that whole thing have to happen, and for us to be working with this wrestling company who we got in touch with because they wanted to promote on the Metallic Onslaught, which led us to staying late, which led us to almost driving off the road. But also me having to tell my friend Maria that, this story, and for her to come up with that idea, and it all just kind of lines up. If anything was different, who knows,
this reminds me of this quote by Terence McKenna. He used to say that nature loves courage. And when you decide to do something and you're really passionate about it, the universe will set out to remove obstacles in front of you so that you can actually, achieve something that you once thought was unachievable. At least initially, obviously afterwards, maybe you will find setbacks because that's how life is. But yeah, I'm thinking about what an auspicious year 2012 was for me as well, because I was listening to the Micah Hank show on my day job. I used to have a lot of time when I was doing computer renders for the company I was working on. So I was all alone in the office, and so I could put either on my headphones or without headphones, I put his podcast or his radio show, and I used to in the chat box. And then he had the idea with Scotty Roberts of doing the Paradigm Symposium.
Right.
And that's when I had this compulsion for the first time. I said, okay, I want to interact with these people that I consider more friends than the people I actually interact with in real life. I want to have the chance to actually go and talk to them. And how do I do that? Because obviously the conference was going to be in Minneapolis. I've never had any, money on me. Money has always been an issue with me. And the prospect of me traveling to the United States was very daunting. And that's when all of a sudden I had this email from Benjamin Grundy from Mysterious Universe asking me to write for them. And that money actually came pretty handy when it came to, purchasing the tickets and paying for the airfare for the Minneapolis conference. And that conference in itself opened the floodgates in so many ways. I can definitely say in my life there is a very marked before and after that was defined by my decision. That was not a really, but that was very uncharacteristic of me, because like I said to our friend Book when I was on his podcast, I can definitely consider myself a hermit. I like a crap that likes to like stay inside a cave or stay inside his house, and I'm very comfortable like being like that. But at that time, for no particular reason, I decided to like, okay, let's play being an extrovert. Let's play being, and imagine, going like an introvert going to this place where he didn't know anyone really. And not only that, but actually appearing at the hotel lobby wearing a bright red luchador mask. It's like, it was kind of like a magic ritual in a way, So was like manifesting the red pill junkie into this plane of existence instead of him living in virtual space, in chat rooms and so on. And I feel that Where Did the Road Go as an act of will had a same or a similar origin.
Yeah. And I also remember, seeing, you had all those drawings of you with the wrestling mask and stuff. And I'm like, oh, cool. Another wrestling fan. Awesome. And then only to find out that you don't give a damn about wrestling.
Well, it's not like that. I value wrestling as a very Mexican cultural representation or a cultural thing. And when I had Greg Bishop here in Mexico like 3 years ago, and we went to a wrestling match, and it's definitely something that if we had a chance, Sarai, I would love to take you to Arena Mexico so you can experience Mexican wrestling the way it's supposed to. And when you are in that moment, you become a wrestling fan. There's no way about it.
Yeah, well, that crowd energy is insane.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Can you guys stick around for a patron?
Sure.
I shouldn't, but I will.
All right. Thank you, Josh. Josh, where can people find you and all your awesome work?
JoshuaCutchin.com. That's JOSHUACUTCHIN. No S, like one cut chin. JoshuaCutchin.com.
So there's no R in there?
It's not Joshua Crutchin, no.
And Red Pill, where can people find all of your stuff?
They can find me at dailygrail.com and also my personal website, absurdbydesign.com, and hopefully very soon all our wonderful backers will be able to receive their copy of the UFO Tarot deck, and also for people who actually requested it, the book, the accompanying book that was edited by Josh, and it's looking absolutely wonderful, and it's something that I'm very proud of.
And
Thank you for the kind words.
I'm looking very forward to seeing it. And thank you both for being such awesome friends in the time I've known you. And I can say that about most of really all the regulars on Where Did the Road Go. It's such an awesome group of people. And I feel blessed to have that sort of, to know that many awesome people. And to have so many awesome listeners, even if I don't get to interact with them as much as I would like to, the people who listen to this show are mostly amazing people. And
except for some of you in the YouTube comments.
Once in a great while, but it's rare. I think the fact that this show is not a shallow sort of show, it brings in really incredible people. I mean, anytime we do an AMA, the questions are just insanely good and hard questions. So especially the Patreons a lot of times, because they're the ones most invested in it. And without them, it would be hard to keep going doing this show without all that support. So thank you, everybody who has ever been on, who has ever supported us, ever been a patron, is a patron, or even, left us cool reviews or told people about the show. And thank you to for doing this 10th anniversary show with me.
Congratulations,
we're all honored to have been part of this, and I'm looking forward to the 20th anniversary of Where Did the Road Go.
Let's hope when we have all the answers.
Let's hope we're all around.
And we've solved everything. Nah, that would suck. We've solved a few things.
Dystopian landscape. It's going to be this dystopian landscape, and there's going to be a radio, and it's just static on. This is Where Did the Road Go?
I'd like to give a shout out here to all of my Patreons, and a special shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more. Billuminati, Chuck Shutters, Leanne Cherry, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, CJ, Tim, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Christine, a blue second gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Chris Cisternos, Craig Parmenter, Diane B, MTK, Eric Todd, Jay, James Lattimore, James Lindsay, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L, Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linz Jackson K, Luke Osborne, MJ Armstrong, Jim and Sophie, Mark Brady, Matt in Delaware, Mr. Weird, Oli Andre Olar, Patricia W., Paul Jeffries, Philosopher of Mirrors, Ray Benedetto, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Seed Person 1, Stacy Sherwood, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Varosh K., Vincent Treewell, Walker, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, and Ren Collier. Thank you all so very much. You help make this show possible. There's, of course, a Patreon segment along with this, as we mentioned. And, that's it. 10th anniversary. We start the 11th year next week with the UFO history. I'd like to give a shout-out to a new patron for this week, Caroline Walker. And I'd also like to give a special shout-out to Vincent Treewell, who does the recaps for the show every week and does a great job just covering a quick view of everything we're talking about, so you can see if it's something that interests you. And I really appreciate him doing that. He does have his own podcast called The Weird Part with Vincent Treewell, so I recommend people check that out. And he just published his first fictional novel called Cosmic Collision, which I'm pretty sure you can find on Amazon. So until next week, I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.